So welcome to our discussion on property tax mainframe data. I'm Carrie Collins and I'll be your host, but our real attraction today is Amy Herron from the County of Santa Barbara. She has some great insights to share with you. In addition, we have with us from Simpler, Barry Tower, our Vice President, and also Zach Cruz. Zach joined Simpler Systems in 2012. And he's worked closely with Amy in Santa Barbara to develop data apps for the migrated property tax data and later the Momentum application. And he has also worked with property tax data in Santa Cruz, Riverside, and most recently Tulare County. He's going to be showing the group some of the data apps that Santa Barbara uses a little bit later. So let's get going. I want to take a moment and introduce Amy to you. Some of you may already know her. Amy Herron is currently the Financial Systems Division Chief for the County of Santa Barbara. She started with the county in 1997 as an accountant. 2 years later, she became a Financial Systems Analyst. Amy is one of those invaluable people in the organization that understands the business and the technology and how they interact. She is the lead analyst for the project to migrate their property tax data off of the mainframe, and most recently, she was in charge of implementing the Momentum application. Today, Amy's going to cover the agenda items you see here, starting with the benefits of freeing the data. She's going to walk through the Santa Barbara project and give you excellent insights, tips, and lessons learned. At the end, we have some time set aside to answer your questions. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Amy Herron. Take it away, Amy.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Amy. I think I've met some of you before. I recognize a lot of the names on the call, and for those that I haven't, hello and welcome. And I'm basically here today to share with you a little bit about what we did in Santa Barbara and how pulling our mainframe data off of the mainframe and making it accessible for other things really helped us a lot in various projects and various stages of our project. So let's just dive right in. I'm going to first talk about the benefits of freeing the data. So once you take this data that you have in your mainframe, and for a lot of us, the mainframe, like Barry was saying, it's an older system, and a lot of us, you know, we may not have as many people that are knowledgeable or maintaining that system, and so want to get it out into a platform that we can easily access it and use it, make it more flexible. And that was one of the things that we did in Santa Barbara County. So once you get it into a different platform that you can access, that for, say, you know, example, SQL Server. You can use a variety of tools to interact with it. You know, one of the tool sets is the Simpler data apps, but you can also use Excel, Access. There's various things that you can use.
This is Barry. While Amy's reconnecting, a couple sort of big picture points that Amy will fill in on. We're essentially saying two things. One, or two steps. One is to take the data off the mainframe and put it into a modern database. And the second step is to build data apps, which we can show you what that is later. Carrie used the term migrate the data earlier, and that's we're not really migrating the data in the sense that you migrate from system A to system B. What we're really doing is just taking initially the data as it exists in the system in all its glory and maybe all of its ugliness depending on the system, and then putting it in a mirror on another platform. And with that, you have just that little small step, which can be tricky. You get this tremendous value we're talking about. You can start doing all kinds of things with it.
I'm back now.
Okay, I'll let you go.
Okay. All right, sorry for that little pause there. Okay, so to continue with what Barry's saying, so again, you know, get it into SQL Server or some kind of platform. You've got a variety of tools you can interact with it now. Once you have that, then you can start reviewing your data for errors and discrepancies. Once people start looking at that data in different ways, you can build out your own custom reports. You know, in addition to what you have on the mainframe, you can do your own reporting, and sometimes more flexible in these other tool sets, as we'll see. You can create a processes and improvements around those processes, because now you have access to that data to use for other things besides what you're doing on the mainframe. You can use it as a stepping stone to data conversion, to push that data into a new system, whether it be in-house or a vendor system. And then ultimately you could use that also as a historical repository for the day when you actually do decide to turn off your mainframe, and now you still have that data, at least in a newer modern platform, always available for whatever research is needed. So these are some of the reasons why we pulled that data off. So in Santa Barbara, we actually started this project way back in 2000, which is weird to say, 16 years ago. We thought, can we do something with this data? But we did, and so what was motivating us at that time was process improvements. We had a lot of processes where we were doing things on paper or maybe some in Excel spreadsheets, and we were starting to see the need for maybe automating some of those processes, but we couldn't automate them unless we had the data in electronic format, because what we were doing with a lot of those processes is taking a mainframe report and then keying the results off of that report into that process. And we wanted to bypass that step. So that's when we decided, let's pull this data off into a SQL, we called it a warehouse of data. And then at that point in time, the tools that we had available to us were Microsoft Access primarily, and we used a lot of Excel spreadsheets, which you can also import data through. So we used those tool sets. We automated a lot of our processes, and I'll talk a little bit more about which processes specifically we automated. We built our own custom reports. Again, at that time we used Microsoft Access. Today we would have used Simpler. We didn't have Simpler available at that time. And then in addition, we sort of had a second phase that happened where the tax collector, once this warehouse was available, they suddenly realized, hey, now we have this data accessible. We could build our own online payments website, and they did that in 2005. And so then the taxpayers could pay their bills online, and they hooked up those collections to pass back through the interface to the mainframe to populate the mainframe. So even though we were running this old mainframe system, we were able to provide this website and this extra feature to our taxpayers, which was nice. So there's various stages at which extracting that mainframe data can be useful. The first stage is you're on your mainframe, you're using that mainframe to do your property tax processes. And at that point, it's still helpful to be able to look at that data. And so anytime you decide to export the data, my recommendation is to just export it as is. Don't do a lot of massaging when you first pull it out. Pull it out, get it into SQL Server, whatever environment you choose, and then do your testing and review of that data. And the testing and review really are critical to make sure that when you pulled it out, you pulled everything out, you didn't duplicate anything, et cetera, et cetera. Also, you can take the time to document that data. So if you're going through that process to pull that out, analyze it, and actually produce some documentation that you can use later in other projects or at that time. The next stage, which is, this is actually kind of how the sequence of our projects went, is some in-house development. That doesn't necessarily mean you're building a whole new application. That means you're maybe building some applications around your existing mainframe to make your processes more efficient. So during that stage, the data can help you with analysis. Again, you can do some ad hoc reporting or some custom reporting as well. And then, like we did, build out websites to provide that data in other forms. And then finally, someday, if you decide to move to a new application or new system, that data can be used for data conversion. And if you decide to move to a vendor system, a lot of times in the vendor system, they will do calculations and processes and such, and there may be a lot of stuff in their database that they don't actually report out to you. So at this point, we're not so much talking about the mainframe data. Now you've converted the mainframe data into this new application, but those same reporting tool sets that you use can now be laid on top of that instead to reveal what's inside what I like to call the black box, the stuff that's sort of hidden from you. So moving on to project planning, some things to consider when you attack a project like this. What we realized was it really required a partnership between technology and the agencies. Agencies meaning like the different departments, assessor, auditor, tax collector. And so you really want to focus on making sure that your project team is made up of the right people with the right skill set, which means you want subject matter expertise in property tax data and really processes, because then you understand how that data is getting produced. On the technical side, there's kind of two components, because you need somebody who understands how to extract the data out of the mainframe, and then somebody who knows the modern tool sets to import that data into a SQL Server environment. Sometimes that could be the same person. Sometimes it could be two different people or a team of people. And I'll tell you a little bit about specifically what we did in Santa Barbara. So our resources were, we had a mainframe programmer who did the data extraction, a financial systems analyst who did the setting up of the SQL database and importing it in, and that was primarily me, and then we added another financial systems analyst much later in the project, but to help with that. And then we also had a manager overseeing the project. So that was, it was a pretty small team, and got a lot done. We did nightly data extractions, and we imported that data to a SQL database. Like I said, we really took the data as is. We didn't change the table structures. We documented that data, so we actually documented what the tables and fields were, and I'll actually show you a little sample of that. We also, there was a lot of fields where there'd be codes like alpha codes or numeric codes that represented something, and there was really no table that represented codes meant. A lot of it was sort of hard-coded in the programs. So we actually built tables that told you what the codes were and what the titles were. So that was another component. We developed procedures to validate the data when we pulled it out of the mainframe. So we did both sample and summary testing. Sample testing, we would pick some sample properties or sample bills, maybe different scenarios, and then we would verify that all of the data elements for that particular property or bill were transferred correctly from the mainframe to the SQL environment. And then the summary testing was like record counts and total dollar amounts, so that we could verify that we didn't drop anything along the way, or like I said, we didn't duplicate anything. We got the same number of records and the same total dollars to come out into that warehouse, that SQL warehouse. And then later, when the tax collector decided they wanted to build that online payments website, they actually took that data from the SQL warehouse that we had, which was sort of that raw mainframe data, and they built a reporting database which took that data and sort of reformatted it in such a way that it was easier for the website to use it. And so they did their own nightly sync from the warehouse to their database. So those were kind of the major things that happened as part of that project. Here's an example of some documentation. This is our supplemental role tables. In our mainframe system, we had actually 6 different subsystems, one for each role type, and I'll show you that in a sec, but this was one of the diagrams we had, and you can see we had on the left, there was a properties table, which was actually a list of the events, supplemental events. We had the master file, which was a list of the tax bills for each event, so you have a one-to-many relationship there. And then we had a fund detail table, which was the charges on each tax bill, and payments is exactly what it sounds like, the payments on each bill. So we just had some nice simple diagrams that we could share with the team that you could quickly look and see, okay, where do I find this data? And then we also drilled down to a deeper level. In each table, we looked at each field, and we provided a description, which sometimes also included an explanation of what kind of data you could expect to see in that field. So this ended up being really useful, both for reporting projects and then later on when we needed to analyze that and move it to other environments like a new system. And we were able to kind of save that knowledge from that mainframe programmer, get that all documented, you know, while that person was available to us. And so some different ways we actually use the data. We use Microsoft Access applications, like I said, primarily in the beginning. We built some applications to help us calculate tax rates and fixed charges, and then these systems created like text files to submit back into the mainframe so that we could load those up for the annual tax roll processing. But we used to do, you know, those things pretty much in Excel, and things were just hand keyed, and so we were able to just pull the data that we needed to do those calculations. We built a system to do roll corrections. Our mainframe was a little weird, and at certain points it would freeze records after you passed the current year, and so you couldn't correct those bills in the mainframe. So we actually had to do the corrections outside, and we were actually doing them all on paper, and then calculating these refunds and cutting those checks. And so we built a system to do those calculations for us, and then calculate the refunds and everything based on the data we used to extract it from the mainframe. We built an impounds application. We did pretty much all of our apportionments outside of the mainframe because none of that had been coded into the system. And again, we had been using ledgers and then ultimately spreadsheets, and then we finally built an application that did all of that. And we also built a system that helped us reconcile the redemption roll and teeter. When it came to websites, there was actually a couple other websites that got developed by the auditor's office. There was a taxes website, which we still have, and that's information available to the public, like taxpayers and whoever else. And then this PTRRS website, which is a reporting website that our districts can log into, and they can see the details of the money that's getting distributed to them and the different revenue types and stuff. And My Taxes is that tax collector website that they built for the online payment. Okay. So those were applications, and that's how we used the data initially. So really, I'd say the first 5 years after 2000, when we built that warehouse, we were building these applications, we were using them, we were looking at this and understanding the data. And then, you know, we just sort of went into a maintenance mode on that for a while until we decided that basically we were going to put in Aumentum as a new property tax system. In between there, we did have some attempts at thinking about doing an in-house project as well. Couldn't really get the resources together, and then ultimately in 2010 was when we signed the contract and started that project on Aumentum. And so we used that data as our source for data conversion into Aumentum. And then also, you know, you don't always convert all of the data that you have available into a new system. Maybe you pick the last 5 years or the last 3 years, whatever it is. We actually picked the last 10 years at that time, which took us back to 2000, because 2000 was the year that we started that warehouse. And everybody had been looking at this data for the last 10 years and telling us all the problems with it, so we had cleaned a lot of it up. So it was actually in pretty good condition. The data prior to 2000 wasn't as clean, so that we used that as our cutoff. But in the historical repository, which was our warehouse that we saved, we kept all that old data actually back to 1978. So once we were ready to turn off the mainframe, we said, great, you know, we already have the data in SQL Server. We're okay with flipping that switch. Okay, so when we started the Aumentum project, we quickly realized that we were going to need a little bit more flexible tool sets to help us with reviewing that mainframe data and basically testing it and such for data conversion. And we also realized that we were going to want to create some way that users could access that larger historical repository when we did decide to turn off the mainframe later on. So we decided at that point that Simpler Systems toolset was available to us. We had used it on a couple of other projects. And that was a great tool set to pick, so we laid that on top of that mainframe data warehouse, and we built a set of reports. and these are still up and running for our users to use. And just a quick description of this menu you're looking at here. So we have some tabs across the top, and I'm going to actually talk about one of the other tabs here later, but we're looking at this mainframe tab here, which is this collection of reports. We have a whole bunch of other reports here on property tax data as well, but this is the historical repository here. These tax roll master files, this is that list of 6 different subtypes subsystems that I mentioned for the different roll types. One of the things that we were lacking in the mainframe was the ability to look at all of the bills for a particular parcel across all of the systems. We had to log into each of those individual systems and go look to see if there was a bill on that parcel. And so one of the things we were able to do when we pulled the data out into a SQL Server and then laid these reports on top of it was bridge that all together, find the common fields, and then search across all tax rules. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and shoot this over to Zach, and he's actually going to demo for you a couple of these reports and how we can use this to find or answer questions that we have about this older property tax data. So Zach, you may take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Perfect. All right. So yeah, as Amy just mentioned, here is the actual live version of the mainframe menu here that was just discussed. And essentially, these are all different tabs up here. You can, add in any number of tabs that you need depending on specific, areas of data that you need to group together. And then within each menu tab here, we actually have these what we call menu groups, these kind of watermarked groupings here, which is kind of even grouping them even further within each tab based off similar attributes and domains of data. And what I'm going to show you here, I'll just jump right into it, into this search all tax rolls data app here, which is combining the 6 different master files into one search with common kind of universal columns that are shared among the 6 master files. So when I click on this link, it's going to take us from this menu page to a pretty standard search page. The search page can have any number of predefined parameters built right in. If you have common defaults or certain ways of summarizing right from the start, other times it'll be completely blank and open-ended for the user to put any criteria they need. And you see here all these text boxes, and you see here this is the show hide button, which shows additional search options here. In this case, you also see this this checkbox section here where you can select any number of the 6 master files to include in the results. In this case, I'm going to keep all of them in, and I'm just going to change this from 2014 to 2013, and everything else will stay the same. Then I'm going to click Go here. And then when this loads, it's going to take us to the data page, which is basically another name for the results page here. And then you see here, down in the bottom, you see the number of rows returned, as well as the time. You see pages, so you can actually page through. There's 100 rows per page. So that's why you see this number here, and you can scroll horizontally to see additional columns, as well as, of course, vertically to see the 100 rows per page. And as I scroll through here, you see this column called tax type, and you actually see they're all combined together. If I were to page through further, you would see secured along with these unsecured and unsecured delinquents. So it's kind of nice to see them all in one place with these most important attributes related to the bill and assessment. So what I'm going to do here is show you some of these features. So you probably noticed that these are all hyperlinked, and that's basically because nearly every single column we allow, by default, we allow it to be searchable with a click to filter. So it's just easily clicking on the data itself to minimize your results further. So I'm going to take a look here at business unsecured file types. And you see here the criteria was added to the top here, so you can always see your active criteria as well as the additional or the original criteria of tax year 2013. You see here the results were minimized to around 9,500 rows, and as you can see, of course, we're only looking at the business file types. The other thing here that is clickable right from the data page is the column headers. Clicking once will sort descending. So you see the highest total, in this case the highest total charges, and then I click again to get the lowest total charges to sort ascending. All right. And so now, okay, so now I'm going to go back to my original search of just the tax year 2013. I could either click the back button, because there are no limitations on how often you can click the back button. You can click it as many times as you need. There's no refresh issues. Or you can, another way to get there is just to remove the criteria that you added. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to remove this to take us back to 2013 with all the different 6 master files again. And in a moment I'll explain some of these other icons here. Okay. So now that we're back to this area here, let's say you found out that you actually needed to see only the city of Carpinteria. So what I'm going to do is click on this little mini magnifying glass to the left of the criteria, and what this does is it lets you it lets you add quick one-off summarizations or filters on the fly rather than having to go back to the detailed search page for more complex requeries. So let's go in here, and I'm going to look at, you notice there, by the way, that to see those additional search filters, I just click here, and I'm going to add only the city of Carpinteria because that's my current research project. All right, so now we see there's 6,535 rows returned, and you see here the situs address is Carpinteria across the board as you page through. But that is still a lot of paging to do, so you might want to, in this case, you might want to take a look at a higher level and see a summary, or as we call it, aggregation. So I'm going to, using that same mini criteria here, this mini search here, I'm going to add a level of aggregation here, and let's take a look at it by TRA, all of the criteria being the same. And so here we have the summary of of the TRAs for 2013 in Carpinteria. And before I continue with this search here, I'm going to show you a couple of other features here on the left. So you can if this is a common report you need to return to, we actually have what we call a shortcut, and that's this icon here, this shortcut green check mark, and it basically adds it kind of like a bookmark that you could easily get returned to. So let's say TRA charges payments by tax here. That's what I'm going to call it. Let me create that shortcut, and it actually returns me to my home page, which is another tab on the website. And you see here, there it is, that one I just created, and just clicking on it will take me right back to where I just was. The exact same results. Okay, and then if I wanted to in the future do it for the next year, just switch this to 2014, or if I wanted to go further back, 2012. I could actually add additional years here using what we call a range special character. These two ellipses, these two periods, signify a range, so this allows us to add multiple years. Actually, a better example would be 2011 to 2013. So that's including 2012. And let's see this. This is actually going to combine the 3 years together. Okay, and then let's go back to the original 2013 only. And then let's say you needed to, you know, this was now ready and this was ready to send off to whoever it was for. You can download it to PDF, to Excel, or to raw CSV. And let's take a look at each of those. So in PDF format, there's a pretty standard way for it to come out. It's basically the same format as it is in the HTML browser version. All the criteria is remaining on the top with totals on the bottom. All right, and now I'm going to download to Excel, and one of the cool things about the Excel download is that, as you'll see, it maintains the formulas that are being used in these summarizations using Excel formulas. So again, it keeps all the criteria and all the formatting with borders and all that, and then it actually will keep the formulas down here. So if you needed to change something really quick, it'll all adjust for you without having to rerun the template in the site, in the website. All right. Okay. And it's raw CSV. I won't show you, but basically, as you guys are all aware, I'm sure, it just takes you to the raw data. If you need to do additional manipulation or import it into some other system, it will take it to CSV without any of the formulas and formatting. Okay, and then, so anyway, back to this summary here. We're looking at the city of Carpinteria and aggregating by TRA. Now, I'm actually going to take a look at this one with the largest bill count, 005002. So you see all these numbers are hyperlinked, and what this does is it takes this summary and drills back down to the detail that is creating these numbers. So when I click on bill count, it takes me down to the detail underlying, and you see here it is the same bill count, 4,361. All right, so now we're back here with this specific TRA now, and let's say you had gotten some additional information again, that the specific owner you were looking for, you had their name now. So I'm going to look up the specific person, and I don't know exactly how his name is entered in the system, so I'm going to use what we call a wildcard or a special character, the asterisk that's used, which in this case it's saying it begins with dirt. If I were to put the asterisk at the beginning, it would say ends with dirt. And if I were to surround it with asterisks, it means anywhere in the name it contains the word dirt. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say if it contains the word dirt, I want to see that returned here. Okay, and sure enough, the one I was looking for was 1117 Calle Lagunitas. And so this is the property number I want to look at. All right, so obviously now it's so specific there's only one row, but from here I could see assessment history if I wanted to, just by removing the tax year. So now we'll see the history of this property, and you see here that this specific property had secured bills as well as a redemption and a supplemental. So you can kind of see those, again, these are the 6 systems working together, 2 coming from the secured master file, 1 coming from the redemption, and 1 coming from the supplemental redemption master file there. And From there, you can click into detail, which would takes us to what we call a detail page, basically showing the detail of all of the master file columns related to, in this case, a secured tax roll. So now, instead of using just those 10 universal shared columns that we were looking at in that last template there, this takes us to the detail for that specific bill in a kind of vertical format so that you can see them all without a lot of horizontal scrolling. All right, now let's get back.
Doc, I was just going to jump in for a second and mention that screen where you show all that detail. In the mainframe, we used to have to look that up on all separate screens, and we'd have to jump all around in the system. And so this was also a big deal to us, that we could see everything all at once.
Oh yeah, I remember you mentioning that actually. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, all these different pieces of information were kind of separated exactly like Amy just mentioned, and now they're all brought together in one place here. And this, this was just what was specified by Santa Barbara. Of course, this could be adjusted in any way necessary here. So let's go back. And now I think I'm done with this search. I got the information I needed. I'm going to return to the mainframe menu. And so some of these other ones that are here, that's definitely the most powerful one here in the sense that it brought together those 6 systems in an easy, clear search. There are some other templates here that are pretty cool to see, but I'll just show you a couple of them. So as you notice, that first one there went to a search page straight from the menu, but some of them, if there's only one way or a very common way of looking at the data, they don't have to go to a search page first. It could actually go directly into the data if it's necessary. So, for example, where's the one? Okay, I'll just show you here. So one of these lookup tables, especially because it's a kind of a assist to look up quickly. Sometimes it goes straight to it, just like that. But of course, it doesn't have to be this small of a lookup table to do that. And of course, it can go to external links as well. It doesn't have to be contained in Simpler Systems website. We can go link out to any external third-party website from the menu as well. Let's see, this other one here, the annual tax increment. Let's say I want to keep, oh yes, this is a good example of the some predefined parameters here straight from the menu. So we're choosing to display only these subset of columns by default, and we're going to group by tax year and TRA, and sort by the fund number, and you'll see what that looks like here for tax year 2013. So I hadn't mentioned grouping yet versus aggregation. Basically, grouping puts common data below a header, as you see here. So first level of grouping is the tax year, and then the second level of grouping is the TRA, but it's still showing you the detail the detail rows. It's not doing a true summary where everything is rolled up into a single sum, but it does give you a grand total for each subgroup there. All right. And with that, that's all I had to show you, unless, Amy, you want me to show something in particular.
I think that's great, Zach. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving on, so kind of talked a little bit about how we laid the reporting tools over that extracted mainframe data warehouse that we built. And now the question is, so where are we at today? So now we've put in this new Momentum property tax system to replace our mainframe, and what are we doing now? Well, we're kind of doing some stuff similar to even what we did against the mainframe in a way. we're taking some data from Momentum and we're putting it into a reporting database, and we're using simpler data apps against it to report that data out and develop our own custom reports. So we're using Momentum as sort of our core, processing system, just the same way we were using the mainframe, and then we're starting now to build things out around it to make our processes more efficient. Some of the reasons for creating a separate reporting database, first of all, speed. So the way that the Momentum database model is designed, it's really designed more for processing and inputting and inserting of records. It's not as well designed for the reporting out of that. So there's some things that we did in the reporting database, like, it's a little technical, but denormalization of the tables, where you go, for example, and where you have a lot of tables that are linked together, you just kind of grab all that data and put it in a flatter format, so you don't have to join, 10 different tables to get an answer. Going and looking up IDs and going find out what code does that reference and what title does that reference. Okay, let's just store that in our reporting database so we don't have to go get that dynamically every time. Also, there were some choices we made regarding effective dating and how Momentum is storing that versus how we can change that to make that easier for reporting. And then also, another reason for doing this whole thing is to kind of fill in those reporting gaps. So Momentum is our main processing system, but it doesn't have necessarily all the reports that we need and want. And in some cases, it's cheaper, easier, faster, quicker for us to create our own reports against that data and fill in those reporting gaps, and also, like we said before, kind of, provide insight into that hidden data or that black box. So a lot of those processes generate a lot of data that's not reported out, or maybe it's only reported out in a summary form and you can't see that detail behind it. And yes, we could ask Thomson Reuters to develop all these extra reports for us, but A, it's going to cost us a lot of money. B, they probably don't have time to do all those reports because they're working with other clients. And C, we kind of prefer the simpler data app tool set because we feel like it's more flexible and we can do a lot more custom stuff with it. We can create one report that we can group sort, do all these different things with one data set instead of having to develop a bunch of different reports. So we have reports that have been developed, like I said, against Momentum. This is what our general use reports menu looks like. So these are reports that both the auditor and the tax collector are both interested in. Our assessor actually is on a separate system. They've got their own system, so they interface to Momentum and they pass their data into it. We have an interface built for that. So on the left side of the menu, you see records, which is like your owner and property data, addresses, assessments, the assessed values coming from the assessor. So this is all data that they're sending us. We're importing into Momentum through an interface, and then we're reporting back out what we've loaded into Momentum through these reports. We have the state roll that comes from the state, and then we have some information on the tax bills that are generated, the collections against those tax bills, some TRA and fund structure information, and then what we call our lookup tables or our code tables, where we have some of the key codes that we might want to look at in the titles, related titles. Here's an example of another report menu that we built. We decided that each department, they have their own processes, and they may want some custom reports just for that department, or they may even want to take some of those general use reports, and instead of just saving it as a shortcut, which is what one of the features that Zach showed, we want to save it as sort of a saved shortcut for everybody as part of their permanent process. So we designed these department-specific menus. Here's the example of the auditors, and you can see some of these processes listed here. And then under each of these processes, for example, let's go drill down into distribution. Then we have a list of various reports on those related to that process. Some of these reports may actually not be from Momentum. There's a few things where there's other things that are feeding those processes from outside. Or for example, our annual tax increment, we actually do this outside of Momentum, so some of these reports may not all come from Momentum, but we have a lot of reports on the distribution process in Momentum, which includes a pre-distribution and a distribution. And we also have a lot of reports on the teeter advance and adjustments distributions that are done by Momentum. One of the things you'll see here is that we have a lot of these reports called detail, and then we have a lot of reports called validation. The detail reports are the results of what Momentum generated, and then the validation reports are what we think Momentum should have generated. So we actually did some analysis, and then we're kind of reconciling that to make sure that things are coming out the way we think they should. And so I'm going to actually show you the results of a couple of these reports. I'm not going to bring up the website. I'm just going to show you some screenshots in the interest of time, so I'm kind of skipping to that now. But I want to show you the difference between, or how we're kind of looking at this black box data. So for example, we have this teeter advance distribution that we run, and here's an example of a summary of what Momentum actually generated for the teeter advance for 2014-15 fiscal year. And you can see all these supplemental bills that got picked up that were generated that year. You can see total charges here. Here's the annual bills for the 2014 year that were also picked up. And these are all unpaid bills. We're kind of verifying here there weren't any collections on them. And so $14 million was advanced to the agencies for those unpaid bills. Now, we can get sort of a summarized view that looks like this somewhat from Momentum, but what we can't get from Momentum right now is this. And this is when you drill down and you get a list of what the actual tax bills and installments are that make up those numbers. So now we can go look and see, hey, does this look like the right set of bills? Let's go look at some of these. Let's go look at them in Momentum. Do they meet the criteria for falling into the teeter advance, yes or no? And we can kind of start to verify that process. So that's one of the things we were really excited about. Okay, so wrap this up so we can move on to a couple questions and answers. A couple lessons learned about extracting data off the mainframe is start early. As you can see, at least for the Santa Barbara project, and I believe in general, your data is valuable now. You can use it for a lot of things. It does require IT and the subject matter experts working together. Extract the data as is. You can always manipulate it later, but it's a lot easier to sort of check it and have a nice clean extract if you just leave it as is and leave any of that manipulation for later on down the line once you've got it in a more modern environment. And then once the data is freed, give people access to it and let them start working with it right away. The more people that are looking at it, they're going to see issues or potential issues with the data. You can start cleaning it up. We had 10 years worth of cleaning up that data, so we didn't have to do a major cleanup project when we decided to use it for data conversion to go into Momentum. We had been doing that cleanup for the last several years. And then finally having that historical repository is really great. Again, when you need to make that decision to finally turn off your mainframe, it sure is nice to have all that data in a format that you can still use it and access it. And an additional thing we did was we actually made a copy of our programming code. Ours was COBOL on the mainframe. And we actually just exported those into text files. And we grabbed that too because we thought, well, we're going to grab all the data. Let's grab all the code too. COBOL happens to be almost like pseudo-English. It's so easy to read. And so that was really nice because then we had all that sort of archived and we could look at that if we needed to after we turned off the mainframe. So we actually turned off. We did decommission our mainframe almost exactly a year after we went live with Momentum. And I think it's time for questions and answers, so I'm going to give it to Carrie, and she's going to run this last portion.
Okay, great. Hey, Amy, thank you so much. That was great. We did get a couple of questions during the session, as well as some that were submitted in advance. So the first one was, can you show us how you use the data for revenue projections?
Yeah, I saw that one in advance, and I did, so I pulled up one of our simpler reports. This goes against actually our Aumentum data. It took a little while to run because this isn't a view that we run very often in this fashion. So if we were going to do this on a regular basis, we would actually create some new sort of summarized tables in our reporting database to make it faster. But I still was able to kind of provide some insight, I think, into the question. So like here, for example, I ran this collections report, and it's a summary by tax year and fund. That's how I decided to aggregate it. And so I've got, the past 6 years, I picked this fund 0, because that's where the 1% tax revenue is collected into. So I just said, okay, let me look at the 1% taxes generated on the secured annual roll for the last 6 years. And so in this report, there's a lot of things this report can do. So penalties, fees, and interest, those are collected into different funds. That's why you see zeros here. But you can see this total tax figure here is kind of what we're looking at. And you can see this increase over time. So I don't know if that helps kind of answer, but this is going against quite a bit of data, and the data is actually stored at a pretty detailed level, so it took a while to pull up. But like I said, we would probably design either a new report or a new table to provide that if we were going to do that on a regular basis.
Okay, great. I think you handled a little bit of this, but is there anything that you can elaborate on as far as what were some of the challenges that you faced in getting the data clean?
Yeah. What I'll say is there's some cases where we had to make some decisions and prioritize where to put our efforts. Because even when we decided to do Aumentum and convert all that data over into Aumentum, there were some things that weren't perfect, and we knew it, but we only had so many man hours to do, cleanup that we were finding. But I would say, the biggest challenge, and I think this is why we ended up doing so much documentation, is the knowledge of that data. And we had very limited resources maintaining our mainframe and people that could answer those questions. So we pretty quickly realized as we started to get into questions as people were reviewing the data that we needed more than one person that could answer those questions. And so that's why we started doing all that documentation and trying to save that knowledge so that we could answer those questions later again as well. And some of I will admit that there was a tiny bit of data cleanup when some of it we went back into the mainframe when we cleaned up, and some of it, those years were, quote, frozen on the mainframe, so you couldn't go back and update them. And so we found cases where, somehow, somebody had keyed in an invalid date or something. And so we had to actually, as we were extracting that out of the mainframe, we knew about that record, and we just put in a little hard coding in there to say, hey, this date, it should really be this date. We researched it, we know what it should be. So there was some of that we had to do.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so we're right at 11:30. We just have 2 more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and keep rolling. If you do need to drop off, we'll document these questions and send out the answers afterwards. If you can stay a couple extra minutes, that would be great. This next one is good. It's kind of leaning on the technical side, but I think it'll be interesting for this group. When you were updating from the mainframe, how were updates to the data handled and how often?
Oh, that's actually a good question. So when I said we did those nightly syncs, depending on what the data set was and the size of that data set, we made some decisions. And in some cases, what we did was just to replace all. So we would take that data set every night off the mainframe and just reload it entirely into the table. In some cases, we would only look for changes. So we'd actually export the whole data set, but then we had a program that we would run to look for changes and then only update the records that changed. And that was a kind of a performance thing and a time saver to run that nightly job. And then the last element of that is for the older data that was, you know, in our mainframe, we only kept like 5 years actually active on the system that you could look up, and all that older data was archived to tape. But there was a way that we could read the tapes and pull that data back in. So for that older data, we read that data off the tapes, did sort of a one-time project to pull that, load that over into SQL Server, and then we were done. And that data was just left alone for those older years.
Okay, great. And one last question here. They want to know, can we get a sample property tax number to view your My Taxes?
Oh, sure, yeah, I can provide one.
Yeah, and we can send that afterwards, so you don't have to go find one right now.
Yeah, yeah, we can send that, and we'll send the link to the My Taxes website too.
Okay, great. Those are the only questions that we had submitted, but if you think of something after the fact and you want to submit a question to Amy after we end, please email it to me, and I'm going to compile a list of the questions and answers and send them out for everybody. And so I just want to take a moment, and Amy, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with the group. And Zach, thank you for the demo and all of your expertise with the Simpler Data apps. And thanks to everybody that came to attend with us today. We really appreciate you being here and look forward to continuing this dialogue with you. Thank you.